What was Kemal Ataturk's involvement and view of the Armenian genocide? And how extreme were his views on Turkish nationalism? Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he was born Mustafa in the 19th century. He was born in a city called Salonika. It's now called Thessaloniki, and it's part of Greece. Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire. So that's why Mustafa was born in Salonika. It was then called Salonika. It's now called Thessaloniki. His parents were Turkish. I mean, his mother was Albanian. His mother was Zubayda. His father was Ali Reza. He had a sister Makbula. And he went on to be one of Turkey's greatest ever soldiers, generals, one of the greatest generals of all time. Okay, and he fought. He fought the Turkish War of Independence. He was the leader of Turkey in Turkey's War of Independence from 1919 to 1923, and it was a do or die situation. He was fighting the Ottoman Caliphate. He was also fighting the European occupying powers who had occupied Turkey at the end of the First World War, and he defeated them all. And he won freedom for Turkey. And his philosophy, his ideology, his vision was Turkey for the Turks. Okay? So Ataturk, in 1915, he was fighting an invasion of Turkey that had been launched by Winston Churchill. The Dardanelles campaign, the Gallipoli campaign. And he fought for months on end, horrific trench warfare against all odds, against a superior enemy, and he defeated them. And he saved Turkey from this Western invasion. So that was one of his great deeds. And it told you what kind of soldier he was, one of the greats of all time. So 1915, he was fighting the Westerners. And his commanding officer in 1915 was Liman von Sanders, a German, because Turkey was allied with Germany at the time, and Germany was the superior power. So Ataturk was reporting to a German commanding officer, Liman von Sanders. In 1915, you also had the Armenian Genocide happening. So the Armenian Genocide happened in multiple waves, starting from the second half of the 19th century, last quarter maybe of the 19th century. The first wave, then a second wave, and then 1915 to 1923 or something, you have the Armenian Genocide. And the Turks, until today, they refuse to accept there was a genocide. But privately, they celebrate it. The Turks. So 1915, who was in power in Turkey? Was it Ataturk? No, Ataturk was merely a soldier. Who was in power in 1915? It was the triumvirate of the Young Turks, who belonged to the Committee of Union and Progress. The Committee of Union and Progress, CUP. It had three leaders who shared power. The Young Turks, the triumvirate of the three Pashas. Anwar Talat Jamal, Anwar Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha. And Talat Pasha was of Romani origin, but Turkish. Yep. So the three Pashas. But who was the most powerful of the three Pashas? It was Anwar Pasha. Let's see what this fine gentleman looked like, Anwar Pasha. Let's see. Okay, let's see the three Pashas. The three Pashas. Talat, Anwar, Jamal. Okay, these three fantastic gentlemen. And Jamal, Anwar. Anwar was the most charismatic of all. He's the guy in front, obviously over here. And the guy on the left, he looks very Indian because he's a Romani. He is Talat Pasha. So Anwar Pasha is the guy who was, the most powerful of the Pashas. And it was these three Pashas who unleashed the Armenian Genocide. And Ataturk was not involved in that. He was busy fighting other things. And obviously in 1919, you have the Turkish War of Independence that takes its own course. And at that time, Ataturk was very busy fighting the Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate, and the Ottoman Caliphate was allied with the Western occupiers, Britain, France, etc. And he was fighting them all. So when he is fighting the foreign occupiers and the caliphate, he has no time to kill Armenians, right? So essentially, the point that I'm trying to make is that Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was not involved in the Armenian genocide. I'm not saying that everything he did was fantastic. I'm not saying that. But he was not involved in the Armenian genocide. He was definitely involved in the burning of Smyrna. Have you heard of this incident ever? The burning of Smyrna. He was involved in that. Maybe he ignored what was happening, but it happened under his commands. Under his command, it happened by soldiers under his command. Maybe he did not pay attention. Maybe he chose to ignore what was happening, but you could say he was responsible for that. But he was not responsible for the Armenian genocide. He did not participate in that. What were his views about the Armenian genocide? Privately, he is said to have been extremely critical of the genocide. He said privately that it was a very evil, super criminal act, and those who did this should be punished. That was his private view, maybe semi-public view. But here's the deal. Ataturk wanted to create a Turkey for the Turks. That means, see, when Turkey was eventually created out of all this, there was a forcible, mandatory population exchange between Turkey and Greece. What was that? There were so many Turkish people in the parts of Greece that the nation of Turkey withdrew from. Those parts of Turkey were part of the Ottoman Empire, including Thessaloniki, where Ataturk was born. So you had lots of Turkish people who lived in these parts of Greece. And you had many Greek people who were living in parts of Turkey, Anatolia, because they've been living there for thousands of years. There was a forcible population exchange. All Turks out of Greece, mandatory. And all Greeks out of Turkey, mandatory. So Turkey became fully Islamic, Greek became fully Christian. It was done on a mandatory basis. Right? So that ensured that Ataturk got a Turkey for the Turks. Now, this new republic he created, the Republic of Turkey, its identity and its legitimacy, it rested to a large extent on ensuring continuity with the territorial outcome and the demographic outcome of the end of the Turkish War of Independence, and also on the demographic outcome of the Armenian genocide. Okay? Because that ensured the creation of a Turkey for the Turks, which was his vision anyway. And that made official recognition of the Armenian genocide politically impossible, politically unacceptable. And that's why Ataturk publicly stayed quiet about this. Okay? But privately, he is said to have expressed, deep disapproval of the Armenian genocide, and he was definitely not involved in that. He was definitely not a participant in this genocide.